For a truly affordable, true workhorse pocket knife, it's hard to beat the Ontario Rat 1 for its sheer utility and no-nonsense attitude. But the question today is, can you beat this icon? Hey everyone, David C. Anderson here, coming at you from the KnifeCenter. Welcome to this episode of Beat the Icon, where we take a look at this classic knife and see what competition there is for what it does. But first, this comes at an interesting time because, as some of you may know, Ontario Knife Company was just recently sold to Blue Ridge Knives, a distributor here in the United States, and it makes you ask the question, what is going to happen to this classic knife? And while I, for one, think there's little chance of the Rat 1 going out of production, they'd kind of be silly not to keep this knife going, it does give us a good opportunity to look at the alternatives. But first, let's take a look at what makes the Rat 1 special. Now, this was designed by the folks over at Randall's Adventure Training, who are the same folks behind the Rat fixed blades and later on the entire ESEE lineup of hard-use survival knives. And that ethos of that hard-use utility mindset finds its way into the Rat 1 design as well. With this knife, we get simple construction, a versatile blade, and importantly, a low price, which has made this a favorite knife for anyone who needs a hard-working blade, but it's something that's also been especially latched onto and embraced by folks who like spending time outdoors. Campers, bushcrafters, survivalists, and the like. This is something that they all know and love, essentially, and I can tell you that because I'm one of them too. This is a fantastic tool for that sort of thing. Starting with the handle, there's enough space here even for large hands, and the design at the end allows fingers to hang off the back without impacting your grip. The scales themselves are injection molded to keep the price down, and they've got just a little bit of texture, not too grippy, but just enough to keep it from being super slick in the process. For strength, we've got full steel liners all the way down the handle, not skeletonized to remove any weight. Consequently, you get a big solid piece of steel. The liner lock holding the blade open is nice and reliable. And rounding things out, you've got a 4-position pocket clip, meaning you can carry it any way you like. And overall, the shape of the handle is such that it works great in a ton of different grips. Whether you're, your meat and potatoes style gorilla grip right here, different types of bushcraft grips, fine carving, choking off the back. It's got enough thickness to it where you can actually work it pretty hard without it digging into your hands too much. And you've even got a good amount of protection here to keep your index finger from sliding forward. But even if that's not quite enough, you can still choke up onto the ricasso area on the blade for finer control too. Just make sure to watch out for the sharpened edge of that heel. You wouldn't want that touching your finger. The blade itself is 3.6 inches long, and it's a drop point shape that could find itself useful in just about any role. It's pointy enough to do some piercing and thrusting when needed, enough belly for long slices and even skinning, and you've got a straight heel here at the back, which is great for push cuts, wood carving, or powering through heavy material. On top of that, its full flat grind is an excellent blend between cutting efficiency and enough strength to withstand harder use. As for the blade material, it starts with AUS 8 for a good stainless option. That's about $35 at the starting point. And starting at just $5 more, you can actually get D2 tool steel as well. So starting out at $35 to $40, that is a lot of capability. Now, everything I've talked about so far is kind of, meat and potatoes, basic construction that comes in with the pivot as well. We do have washers here, not ball bearings, which have proliferated across the more affordable stuff nowadays. But that's a key part to the Rat 1's philosophy of use as well. And despite that, despite being meat and potatoes, despite having what some might say is inferior tech, I would disagree, but that's beside the point. Despite all that, you've still got great flicking action with the thumb studs on this knife. So it's very easy to use and a lot easier to keep free of gunk when you're out working hard. It's one less distraction you have to worry about. So all of that sounds great, but what if you want something else? What if something happens to the Rat 1 and you need to look somewhere else? What else out there do we look at to take the fight to this icon? And the logical place to start would be with a knife made or designed by the exact same people who designed the Rat folder, and that is the Avispa. branded here with the ESEE logo on the blade. Again, like I said, same folks who designed the rat, and it's pretty darn apparent when you hold them side by side. And the lineups are very similar as well. We have the availability of D2 blades starting around $40. We've also got an AUS 8 stainless option starting at about $35. Additionally, we also have a true carbon steel option with the Avispa. They've got an SK5 option also starting around 35 bucks. We've got essentially the same handle shape here. It is slightly different, but for all intents and purposes, it is the same outline. We've got the same durable style of pivot construction. The biggest difference from the front side view of this knife, however, is a little bit of a tweak to the blade. Instead of the kind of pointier drop point of the Rat 1, we have a bit more drop to the Avispa. It's a little bit broader, not quite as good at finer piercing, but a little closer to kind of that spear point bushcraft ideal that has a point almost exactly center line here, slightly above on this case, but like I said, it's getting closer to that. The other big difference when you turn it around is in the handles. From the front, you can see we still have injection molding, a little bit more texture than on the Rat, but on the back we have a stainless steel frame lock. 4-position pocket clip makes its way over as well, but the lock here on the back itself is the main difference and is going to create a quite different knife in hand than the Rat 1. Let me explain it to you like this. This is built just as nicely as the Rat 1. In fact, I believe they're built in the exact same factory. But this knife can work just as hard as the Rat 1, but you might not be able to work it as hard as the Rat 1, and that's because the handles are thinner. They're gonna, bite into the hand a little bit more. Wearing gloves can alleviate that a little bit, but it's still gonna be a fact of nature. On the plus side, this is gonna be easier to carry in a pocket every day. So everything, of course, as we know, is a trade-off. That's what you get with this Avispa. Next up, the BK40 from Becker Knife and Tool, made by K-Bar. And I think no knife since the Rat's introduction has truly taken the fight to the Rat 1 like the BK40 has. Now we do have to talk about price real quick. There's AUS 8 and D2 versions of this BK40 available. Each one is about $5 more than the least expensive Rat version with those steels. What do you get for that extra money? Well, you get about the same blade size, not quite as pointy, but a little more broad, a little bit thicker, so not quite as slicey here as well, but maybe a little bit more brute strength behind the Becker blade. You also get a 4-position pocket clip on this knife, just like you do on the Rat, but it is a strong sprung wire in this case. A little bit of a different vibe there. A little bit more comfortable in the hand in certain grips too, especially in my opinion, if you swap it down to the tail of the knife here. But the biggest advantage that the Becker is going to give you over the Rat is in the handle ergonomics. This is an excellent handle. It's injection molded. You've got actual swells. It's not just a flat piece of plastic on the side, and as such, it feels exceptionally comfortable in this saber or this hammer grip right here. Works well for different versatile grips also. Maybe not quite as accommodating here right on the rear end if you're choking off the back, but still not a prohibitive design. That is, as with any Becker design, fixed or folding, the calling card of this knife. A Becker knife has handle comfort for days, and that wasn't going to change just because we had a folder. Next up, we have the Spyderco Tenacious lightweight with the injection molded handle scales. About $48 for this. It's a little more expensive. What you are getting for that, though, is a slightly more premium feel. It feels more nicely put together. Doesn't mean it's more capable than the Rat 1, just feels a little bit nicer. It's kind of one of those intangible things. For the blades themselves, technically a little less length on the Tenacious, but actual sharpened edge is just about the same between the two of them. The steel is HCR 13 MOV, which metallurgically is essentially the same as AUS 8, and with a reputable company like Spyderco behind it, you're going to be getting pretty much identical performance, I would say, between the two. Got a great full flat grind with great slicing potential on this Tenacious and enough thickness there. It still feels like it could work pretty nicely. Less in the handle department in terms of outright length, but you don't have to actually choke up on the handle to get right behind the edge. You can do that just in a standard grip on the Tenacious. Always been a good thing about that. You are going to get more grip than on the Rat 1 thanks to the bidirectional texturing on this FRN. And then all the other essential feature duplications from the Ontario Rat you've got. You've got the 4-position pocket clip, you've got the washer-based pivot, you've got the liner lock, you've got fairly snappy action, especially once they're broken in. Another great option if you want something with a little bit nicer feel and maybe slightly more everyday carry vibes or friendliness to it than the Rat 1. It's a little less obvious of kind of an outdoor folder than the Rat is, but it can still pull off the job. Next one, the steel will Cutjack is an interesting alternative. Price-wise, they start with D2 steel. There is no stainless option or no affordable stainless option on the Cutjack. About $45 for this. Blades, actually very similar. Almost the same sharpened length, almost the same edge profile itself. Edge itself a little bit thinner on the steel will, so a little bit easier slicing right out of the box. You've got a choke-up point with the finger choil on that steel will rather than the flat ricasso space on the Ontario. We've got injection molded handles just like on the Rat. A bit more texture thanks to the slightly more aggressive shaping going on right here. We have an inset liner lock, maybe not quite as much of a brute force style vibe here, but it's a little nicer. And the skeletonization on that removes a little bit of weight too. Handle's not quite as brute force either. It is a little bit thinner than the Rat. A little bit easier to carry, but still decent, I would say, in its kind of feel and its versatility. Now, the biggest difference here is the flipper, but in some ways it's more similar to the Rat 1 than it is most of the other ball bearing equipped flippers these days, because you do have a washer-based pivot here. And the steel will knives are proof that when done right, they can flip pretty much just as nicely as a good set of ball bearings. They've always done a phenomenal job of tuning their washer-based pivots right here. So you get good flipping action here. In some ways, this doesn't feel like a perfect replacement for the Rat 1. I think the handles are a little too thin and a little less suited for, you know, those kind of broader, heavier use tasks. There is something in Steel Will's lineup, though, that I think does do the trick quite nicely, and that's the Barghest. It's maybe a little more tactically kind of designed, but you do have a ball or a washer-based pivot with that same great flipping action. You've got a phenomenally versatile blade, very similar to the Rat's blade here. A little bit thicker, a little bit stronger. You've got G10 for the handles. Maybe not quite as versatile of a handle here either, but more than the Cutjack. The problem with this, and the problem with so many potential alternatives to the Rat 1, is the price. Normally, regular price on this is just under $75. So it's a phenomenal knife, and it feels very nice, and it can do a lot of work, but it doesn't hit the bargain vibes that the Ontario is king of. Speaking of that, let's take a look now at some other classic kind of affordable knives, like affordable workhorses, easy to recommend for what they give you for the money. And first is the Buck Bantam, the large version of it. Very cool knife, the only US made knife on the table here today. Normally at this price, across everything else you're seeing here, you are dealing with Asian imports, but not so with this knife. Starts at $30, so less expensive by $5 to $6, five or so bucks from the least expensive Rats. And you get a 420HC blade in this case, also about 3.6 inches long. Here it is compared to the Rat. You've got a little bit more sharpened edge itself. Thickness, about the same. You don't have the full flat grind, but you do have a saber height hollow grind here and a nice stonewash finish, which I personally happen to like. So you get good thinness behind the edge, a little more thickness there at the spine for strength. Handles are injection molded. This is a mossy oak camo version, but right now we've got black and a blaze orange camo version also available. Kind of contradictory, but check out the picture, you'll know what I mean. You do lose a couple of key features that the Rat has that you don't get on the Bantam. First, pocket clip. It is a single position right side tip down clip in this case. You don't get tip up, you don't get left hand mountability either. If you're okay with that, certainly a worthy alternative, but just keep that in mind. We have a lock back here for strength. Not as easy to close one-handed, certainly, although it is possible. It requires a bit more care, I would say, though. But some folks are going to like the strength of the lock back a little more than the liner lock as well. So that's the trade-off you're getting right there. In comparing the grip between the two, it's a little more kind of naturally oriented towards a saber grip. Other grips are certainly going to work too, but not quite to the same amount of comfort that the Rat 1 will give you. But still, I think a good option. Next, Byrd knives, the subsidiary of Spyderco, and the Cara 2. Pricing on these start about $37 for the normal price here. Now these knives give you about the same amount of blade and about the same amount of handle, but in terms of their character, they're miles apart. The Rat 1 is a bit of a bruiser, a bit of a tank without being a overbuilt tank. It just has that feeling of smash. I mean that in a good way. Whereas the Cara 2, whether you go with the injection molded versions or the slightly more expensive G10 versions, these feel more like precision instruments. These are about fine slicing, very accurate cutting, very efficient cutting. We've got 8CR steel here, but look how thin those blades are. These things are just about the slice. If that's what you're going for, this is going to do that better than the Rat 1. But if you're going for that hard use folder that you're going to take out camping or you're going to put through hours and hours of work, I might like the vibe of the Rat a little bit better. Your mileage may of course vary. These things are still built very well. You do have more traction from these. You have more options for precise grips, but the other different types of carving grips that you might want to use are not going to be as comfortable on these knives. You do have the strength of the lockback though, which I talked about on the Buck. And on that note, we're going to look at another one. This one I really like as a Rat alternative, actually. This is the Cold Steel Double Safe Hunter. There's a clip point version as well as this Slockmaster version, which has this kind of elliptical drop point shape. Here it is next to the Rat 1, as you can see, very similar in size. We've got just about the same amount of sharpened edge. You've got an injection molded handle with plenty of length. You've got the ability to choke up behind the edge on both of these knives as well. You've got 8CR series steel on the Cold Steel. Like I said, very analogous to the AUS 8 versions of the Rat 1. Again, Rat 1 starts at $35. This Slockmaster from Cold Steel, $33. So just underneath it in price. You've got the stability of the lockback as mentioned. Some folks are really going to like that. You've got an extra degree of safety thanks to the slider switch here that's going to prevent that lockback from being accidentally disengaged. And let me see if I remember this right. It also works in the closed position to keep the knife from opening on you inadvertently. Now, what would you give up compared to the Rat 1? Well, not the pivot. We've still got a washer-based pivot here. Now, it's not quite as thick on the handle, not quite as much girthiness to the grip. Still pretty decent. Still pretty versatile, even though you have a kind of an intentional index finger groove here at the front. You're still going to be able to do a lot of other positions, a lot of other grips quite nicely. Slicing efficiency, a little bit down versus the Rat. As you can see, we've got slightly more thickness on the blade and not a full flat grind here, so it's a little more robust. Again, that could be a good thing, but that is one thing you're getting differently than the Rat. Also, single position pocket clip here, right side tip up in this case, so you don't have the versatility and the adjustability there. And a reversible thumb stud that can be used from the left, but it's a little bit less handy than the true dual thumb studs you get on the Rat 1. Still, I think this one is definitely right up there as a great alternative option to the Ontario. The biggest difference, as mentioned, is kind of that feeling of heftiness. So the next one is going to give you something that definitely has that. And it's going to be a knife that's even cheaper than the Rat 1, a decent bit cheaper actually. This is the Ka-Bar Beartooth. Comes in at 20 bucks right now. For that, you've got a 3.5-inch blade, a little bit shorter than the Rat, but sharpened edge itself, very close right here. About the same kind of thickness, but you have a saber height hollow grind here rather than a full flat. So thinner behind the edge itself, gets thicker towards the top, and a little bit more strength at the spine itself. 440 series stainless steel here. I don't believe it is 440C, so most folks are going to see that as a downgrade to the AUS 8. But again, almost half the price, depending on which version of the Rat you are getting. And it gives you that feeling of absolute solid build quality. Full-length liners, non-skeletonized. We have G10 for the scales and a steel bolster here. Gives it a nice bit of heft. Liner lock, just like the Rat 1. 4-position pocket clip as well, so you've got the options there. The action itself is not as readily satisfying as the Rat, but you do have that washer-based pivot that is so good at keeping gunk at bay. For 20 bucks, it's going to be hard to beat the hardworking nature of the Beartooth right here, but that's not the question we're asking today. At 20 bucks, does it beat the $35 Rat 1? Let me know in the comments what you think. And to close out this video, we're going to transition away from all the washer-based pivots we've looked at and take a look at a few things that do have ball bearings. So right off the bat, that is going to be a major difference here. It's something that may require a little bit more cleaning, a little bit more attention to keeping it free of debris when you're working it hard. But there's some really high quality alternatives here to take a look at. The first is Honey Badger knives. They have 3 main designs. They have the large, the medium, and the small. Those are the names of them. The large is the size that is going to most closely line up with the Rat 1. Here you can see both of them next to each other. And price-wise, the cheapest plain edge AUS 8 Rat 1 on our site right now is 36 bucks. This Honey Badger is 36 bucks. Comes with an 8CR series stainless blade, as mentioned, full flat grind, a little bit thicker than the Rat, but a little bit taller as well. So actual grind angle might be pretty close to similar. You can also get it in D2 for a little bit over 50 bucks. And the D2 version with the drop point blade shape is going to have no choil, so no space to choke up, but more sharpened edge. Whereas the 8CR version, you do have that jimped choil there. The jimping does give you a little bit of extra traction in there, which is quite nice. Beyond that, you are going to get with the large Honey Badger knives more blade options. There's 6 different blade shapes available on this knife right now, as opposed to 1 on the Rat 1, but we're looking at just the drop point here for obvious reasons. Handles, injection molded, several different colors. We have skeletonized inset liners, not quite as tanky feeling, but still feels pretty darn solid. Flipping action, excellent, nice and clicky. You've got a finger hole for other opening options as well as the flipper tab there. Deep carry pocket clip, which is reversible. So you have left and right. You don't have a tip down option with either of these knives though. Feels very well put together. The stainless version, the AUS or 8CR version at roughly the same price as the Rat, definitely a compelling option. The D2 version at $57 though, that's a pretty good hike up from the starting at $40 D2 versions of the Rat 1. Doesn't mean the Honey Badger is not a good knife, but it is pulling a little farther away from the D2 versions of the Rat than the stainless version. So keep that in mind if you're interested. This next one, the last two I think actually are both, in my mind, super compelling alternatives to the Rat if you are okay with a flipper. The first is the CJRB Taiga. Really exciting for a few reasons. First of all, price, 34 bucks. $1 or $2 less than the cheapest of the Rat 1. You've got G10 handles, not injection molded here, a bit more premium feeling, a little bit more texture as well. You've got the flipping action, which is excellent. You've got a great blade shape here. Let me hold the two up side by side so you can get a kind of view between those. Actual sharpened edge, about the same, even though raw length is about the same too, now that I'm looking at it. The killer feature though, like the killer app here, RPM 9 powder metallurgy steel at $34. And they've always said to us that their target when designing this steel, which is proprietary to CJRB and Artisan Cutlery, their parent company, is edge retention as close as they could get it to something like D2, but it's tougher, less prone to chipping, and it's stainless. So that is a pretty good performance envelope right there. And the fact that they're offering it to you here at a $34 price point is kind of a little bit insane. Great flipping action, great versatile drop point blade shape. Let's compare geometries here. A little bit thicker than the Rat 1 and not a full flat grind. So a little bit less pure slicing efficiency, but not prohibitive in its slicing ability. Great little shape. Good feel in the hand. You've got some of the girth that is such a good calling card of the Rat 1. You've got it on the Taiga. You've got the ability for alternate grips. Super, super nice option in my opinion. And last but not least, also delivering on that awesome meaty hand feel that the Rat 1 delivers is the SOG Tellus FLK flipper. These are a little bit more expensive at about $50. Now the steel here actually offers a pretty interesting alternative. It's not, perfectly lined up with the kind of the options we've seen so far. 440C stainless, really good option, really good material for the price too, especially this much of it. Got a big, broad shape here. Let me hold it up next to the Rat 1. There it is. Not quite as pokey, certainly, if your needs, revolve around more piercing. The Rat 1 might be a little bit better, but for an outdoor folder, this is a great, great blade shape. Edge geometry, blade geometry, I should say. A little bit thicker, but the height of the grind is actually higher than the whole height of the Ontario's blade. High flat grind here. Good amount of sliciness, awesome amount of belly here for slicing or for food prep or hunting and skinning, that sort of thing. Ball bearings in the pivot, make sure to keep them clean in that sort of scenario. But this is what's really cool. The handles are injection molded. It is a liner lock, but the liner itself, rather than kind of folding in from the handle scale and creating a gap that debris could get into, they've attached essentially an onlay to the liner that moves with it. So that little opening does not present itself. So it's a little bit easier to keep that area clean and still maintains the comfort that you might lose on if they had made this a frame lock of similar design. Really great meaty feel in the hand. Little bit less versatile for alternate grips than the Ontario is. So you'll have to keep that in mind. But you do get excellent flipping action with the thumb studs or the flipper. Both work great. You get a folded pocket clip, not deep carry, but it is to position at the very least. So you have left or right carry in the tip up orientation. Fantastic value for this knife, but does it offer the same kind of value you get from the Ontario? That is where, at the end of our video now, where you come in our comments section. Let me know, which one of these knives, if any, do you think have what it takes to beat the icon that is the Ontario Rat 1. If you have another knife that isn't on this video that you think would make a worthy challenger, would love to hear that as well. Leave those in the comments, and to get your hands on any of the knives here. If one of these did catch your eye, and you're looking for your next Rat 1 beater, check out the links in the description. Those will take you to KnifeCenter.com, where we've got our long-running Knife Rewards program in place, meaning when you buy one of these knives today, you get to earn some free money up to 5% or more on a future one. I'm David C. Anderson from the Knife Center, signing off. We'll see you next time.